USS Thresher Deep Dive. On April 10, 1963, in the North Atlantic, about 220 miles east of Cape Cod, the sea lay calm under an overcast sky. A nuclear submarine was preparing to dive to its maximum rated depth in a routine test. The submarine was the USS Thresher, the lead boat of a new class of fast attack submarines, freshly out of a 9-month overhaul. 129 men were aboard, 16 officers, 96 enlisted sailors, and 17 civilian shipyard technicians, all under the command of Lieutenant Commander John Wesley Harvey. On the surface, the submarine rescue ship Skylark tracked the dive and stayed in contact by underwater telephone. As the Thresher descended toward its test depth of roughly 1,300 feet, a garbled message reached the Skylark. The transmission spoke of a minor difficulty and an attempt to blow the ballast tanks and rise. The high-pressure air meant to force water out of those tanks failed to lift the boat. Moisture in the air system froze and choked the valves, and the submarine kept sinking. Then the Skylark's sonar operators heard a sound none of them would forget: the long, crushing roar of a hull collapsing. Far below its rated depth, the Thresher imploded in a fraction of a second, and every man aboard died instantly. Surface ships circled for hours, calling into a radio that never answered. The Navy launched a search, and the deep-diving bathyscaphe Trieste eventually found the wreckage scattered across the seafloor more than 8,000 feet down. A Navy court of inquiry concluded that a failed silver-brazed joint in a saltwater piping system had most likely sprayed seawater into the engine room, shorting out electrical panels and triggering an automatic shutdown of the reactor. With no power, the boat could not save itself. The loss of the Thresher remains the deadliest submarine disaster in history, and the deadliest nuclear submarine accident ever recorded. It pushed the Navy to create the SubSafe program, a sweeping overhaul of how submarines are built, inspected, and certified. No United States submarine certified under SubSafe has ever been lost. Kursk Barents Sea explosion. On August 12, 2000, in the Barents Sea off northern Russia, a major naval exercise was underway across cold, gray water. A nuclear-powered cruise missile submarine was preparing to fire a practice torpedo. The submarine was the Kursk, one of the largest attack submarines ever built, with a crew of 118 aboard. Among them was Lieutenant Captain Dmitry Kolesnikov, an officer in charge of the boat's rear compartments. Inside the bow torpedo room, a practice torpedo's volatile propellant leaked and detonated. The blast was so powerful that it registered on seismographs hundreds of miles away. About 2 minutes later, the fire from that first explosion cooked off the warheads of several more torpedoes. The second blast was far larger, tearing open the front of the submarine, which dropped to the seafloor about 350 feet down. Most of the crew were killed by the two explosions. 23 men survived in the rear 9th compartment and gathered there in the dark. Russian rescue attempts in rough seas repeatedly failed to lock on to the escape hatch. After days of failure, Russia finally accepted foreign help, and Norwegian divers opened the hatch to find the compartment flooded and no one alive. In Kolesnikov's pocket, searchers found a note he had written by feel in the darkness. He recorded that the men from the 6th, 7th, and 8th compartments had moved into the 9th, and he wrote that their chances were almost none, closing with regards to everyone. The note proved the survivors had lived for hours after the explosions. Investigators concluded that a faulty practice torpedo, fueled by volatile hydrogen peroxide, had leaked and exploded. An official inquiry closed in 2002, blaming the torpedo. The disaster became a defining early crisis of Vladimir Putin's presidency. Ming 361, Bohai Sea, suffocation. On April 16, 2003, in the Bohai Sea off the northeastern coast of China, a diesel-electric submarine was running training maneuvers in shallow coastal water. The vessel was Submarine No. 361, a Ming-class boat of the People's Liberation Army Navy carrying a crew of 70. To charge its batteries while staying hidden just beneath the surface, the submarine ran its diesel engine and drew air through a snorkel that reached above the waterline. At some point, the snorkel's air intake valve closed, or failed to open when it should have. With the intake sealed, the still-running diesel engine kept pulling oxygen from the air sealed inside the hull. The level of breathable air fell fast through every compartment. The crew lost consciousness and suffocated, most likely within minutes, before anyone could shut the engine down or bring the boat up. The submarine then drifted silently for days. A Chinese fishing boat spotted its periscope cutting slowly across the surface, and Navy vessels reached it on April 26th to find the entire crew dead at their stations. Investigators determined that a mechanical failure of the snorkel intake had let the diesel engine consume the breathable air. By some accounts, the men died so quickly that many were found in ordinary working postures, with no sign of panic. China's leadership publicly acknowledged the disaster in early May and attributed it to mechanical failure, and several senior naval officers were dismissed. It remains the deadliest peacetime disaster in the history of the Chinese Navy. K-19 reactor meltdown. On July 4, 1961, in the North Atlantic off the coast of Greenland, a Soviet ballistic missile submarine was on patrol far from any friendly port. The submarine was the K-19, the first Soviet nuclear-powered missile boat under Captain Nikolai Zatiev, with a crew of about 139. In the early hours, the crew discovered that pressure in one of the two nuclear reactors had dropped to zero. A leak in the cooling system meant the reactor core was no longer being cooled. Without coolant, the reactor temperature climbed toward 1400 degrees, threatening a full meltdown that could tear the boat apart. There was no spare part aboard and no replacement cooling system. Captain Zatiev ordered a team of engineers to build a new cooling line by hand, which meant entering the reactor compartment directly. Working in short shifts in lethal radiation, 8 men welded a makeshift water line and brought the temperature down, saving the submarine from destruction. The men came out vomiting and disfigured, their bodies already failing. The boat surfaced and limped toward a rendezvous with other Soviet vessels to evacuate the crew. All 8 men who had entered the reactor space died within days from massive radiation doses. Over the next 2 years, 14 more crew members died of radiation-related illness, 22 deaths in all. The accident was buried in secrecy, and the survivors grimly nicknamed their boat Hiroshima. The Soviet Union hid the truth for decades, confirming it publicly only in the early 1990s. The repair effort is remembered as one of the most extreme acts of crew sacrifice in submarine history. Nerpa freon flood. On the evening of November 8, 2008, in the Sea of Japan, a brand new nuclear attack submarine was running submerged on its acceptance sea trials. More than 200 people were aboard, many of them civilian shipyard workers. The submarine was the Nerpa, an Akula-class boat not yet handed over to the Navy, crowded with crew and Stemets testing its systems before delivery. Around 8:30 in the evening, the boat's automatic fire suppression system activated, though there was no real fire. The system was designed to flood compartments with gas to smother any flames. Instead of foam or water, it released a gas based on freon into 2 crowded compartments. With many people asleep or unprepared, there was almost no time to reach the emergency breathing masks. The gas pushed the oxygen out of the air, asphyxiating its victims and freezing the lining of their lungs. 20 people died and dozens more were injured before the system could be shut off. Survivors brought the submarine back to the surface, and other Pacific Fleet vessels evacuated the injured to shore hospitals. The deaths came from an unsanctioned activation of the new fire suppression system, combined with a gas mixture that proved deadly in an enclosed space. A crew member was initially blamed for triggering it, but he was acquitted, and the precise cause of the activation was never officially established. Most of the dead were civilian specialists rather than Navy sailors. A criminal case followed, and the submarine was later repaired and leased to the Indian Navy. It was the deadliest Russian submarine accident since the Kursk. ARA San Juan implosion. On November 15, 2017, in the South Atlantic, about 280 miles off the coast of Argentina, a diesel-electric submarine was making its way home to its base at Mar del Plata. The submarine was the ARA San Juan, carrying 44 crew, among them Lieutenant Eliana Kravchik, the first woman to serve as a submarine officer in Argentina's Navy. The boat reported a problem. Seawater had entered through the snorkel and reached the battery compartment, causing a short circuit and a small fire in the bow. The crew reported they had isolated the fire and were continuing on battery power. Then, in its final message, the submarine signaled that it was submerging, and all contact was lost. Acoustic sensors later detected a sharp, violent sound, consistent with an implosion near the boat's last known position. All 44 crew were gone. A massive international search, drawing in more than a dozen countries, scoured the ocean for the missing submarine, but the surface search found nothing. A full year later, the private firm Ocean Infinity located the wreck about 3,000 feet down, collapsed and scattered across the seabed in a pattern consistent with a hull implosion. Investigators concluded that water entering the snorkel had triggered the battery fire that doomed the boat. An Argentine court later examined whether the Navy had sent an unsafe, poorly maintained submarine to sea. The disaster forced a painful national reckoning over the state of the country's military. Komsomolets escape pod failure. On April 7, 1989, in the Norwegian Sea off northern Norway, a deep-diving nuclear submarine was returning from patrol through cold, heavy water. The submarine was the Komsomolets, a one-of-a-kind titanium-hulled boat that could dive deeper than any other in the world, with 69 men aboard under Captain Evgeny Vanin. While the boat was submerged hundreds of feet down, an electrical short started a fire in an aft compartment. The fire spread fast through the rear of the submarine. Ruptured high-pressure air lines fed the flames, and oil ignited on a hot turbine. The submarine managed to surface, but the fire was out of control, and the hull began taking on water. The crew abandoned ship into the near-freezing sea as the boat went down. Most of the men had no time to reach the life rafts and began dying of hypothermia in water just above freezing. Captain Vanin and 4 others took shelter in the submarine's escape capsule and rowed it up to the surface, but a flaw caused the hatch to blow open violently, and only one of them survived. Rescue aircraft and ships reached the scene too late for most of the crew. Of the 69 men aboard, 42 died. Only 4 were killed by the fire and smoke. The rest died of hypothermia and drowning while waiting for help. The titanium boat sank more than a mile down, carrying its nuclear reactor and 2 nuclear-armed torpedoes to the seafloor. A Soviet investigation pointed to the fire and the slow arrival of rescue forces. The rubber still rests on the floor of the Norwegian Sea, monitored to this day for radioactive leaks. USS Scorpion lost with all hands. On May 22, 1968, in the Atlantic about 400 miles southwest of the Azores, a nuclear attack submarine was making its way home to Norfolk, Virginia. The submarine was the USS Scorpion, returning from a Mediterranean deployment with 99 crew aboard. On the night of May 21st, the boat sent its last routine position report and then went silent. When the Scorpion failed to arrive at Norfolk on schedule, the Navy launched a search across the open ocean. Months later, the wreck was located on the seafloor, 2 miles down, broken into sections. All 99 men aboard had died. A Navy court of inquiry examined the wreckage photographs and acoustic records, but could not establish a definite cause, ruling that the reason for the loss could not be determined from the available evidence. Over the years, theories ranged from a malfunctioning torpedo to a battery explosion, but none was ever confirmed. The Scorpion remains one of only 2 nuclear submarines the United States Navy has ever lost, and the cause of its sinking is still officially unsolved. USS S-four Provincetown collision. On December 17, 1927, in the cold water off Provincetown at the tip of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, a Navy submarine was running submerged speed trials close to shore. The boat was the USS S-four, an 8-year-old S-class submarine with 40 men aboard, rising toward the surface at the end of a measured run. As the submarine came up, the Coast Guard destroyer Paulding, out patrolling for rum runners, struck it broadside without warning. The dossier's bow tore open the submarine's hull. Water flooded in, and the S-four dropped to the bottom in about 100 feet of water. Most of the crew drowned quickly in the flooded compartments. 6 men survived, sealed in the forward torpedo room, and divers who reached the hull could hear them tapping in Morse code. One diver pressed his helmet against the steel and received a tapped message asking whether there was any hope. A winter storm drove the rescue ships off the site, and over the next 2 days, the 6 trapped men used up the last of their air and died before anyone could reach them. The sinking was ruled a collision caused by the destroyer failing to spot the surfacing submarine. The tapped question, "Is there any hope?" became one of the most haunting lines in American naval history. The public outrage over the failed rescue pushed the Navy to develop real submarine escape and rescue equipment, including the Momsen lung and the McCann rescue chamber, gear that would save lives just a decade later. If you'd like to see more videos like this, subscribe and tell me what to cover next in the comments.